This morning cafe, according to my chronometer, a minute past 8 a.m. And this particular morning, now in 2019, Ipsos Global Trend Survey in 33 markets found that concern for the environment, or basically the whole climate emergency, was the #1 value that united people around the world. In September 2020, another whole survey found that an increase in concern that we are basically headed for an environmental disaster if we don't change our habits quickly. This particular points out this whole bit of matters environmental disaster really points out how even for a startup company or even for a company, having a corporate social responsibility and really knowing how to maneuver in case you really probably not on the whole right path, but then how can you actually be on the right path for matters matters CSR basically. And I just have the right mind for this conversation. Kui Karuki, Senior Research Manager at Ipsos Kenya. Karibu sana. Thank you. First of all, even for the viewer, they probably had Ipsos, but they wonder, what does Ipsos do out here?
Yeah, I know Ipsos has been known for one thing for a long time, but essentially we are one of the largest research companies, actually founded in France. But our main thing is custom research. Most of the work we do is in market research, for organizations, for corporates, SMEs, MSMEs. We also work with governments, NGOs, academics, really just to carry out the research to answer their business questions or research questions. That's what we do.
Right. Yeah. And because obviously you work hand in hand with a number of companies, even when you're doing the research, what are the major questions that some of these companies would probably ask Ipsos, even in regard to CSR, before we actually get a whole definition of what is CSR? Yeah,
I know obviously we work a lot with companies, and companies, their main agenda is how do we grow our business, our revenue, our profit. So I think one of the key questions is, okay, we want to be seen as socially responsible, so we've got CSR initiatives, but how important is this for the consumer? How is this actually impacting our image? If we want to embark on it, maybe even just for internal, just needs or wants, and also maybe for their stakeholders or board members, what is it that we need to do, and what is likely to work?
Right. Yeah. So basically, now what is, we definitely won't know. Yeah. Corporate social responsibility, what does it entail? Do I have to be responsible just in, maybe I've set up a company. How do I even be responsible? What does it mean?
Well, I know today the CSR has moved a bit more to focusing more on ESG, so looking at how you can be environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and responsible in terms of governance and practices. I think what previously we had done, or organizations had done, maybe have small activities, give back to a charity here and there, have a bit of PR, go back to business as usual. But now what it is that we're looking at is what is it that a business can do to integrate ESG practices in their business. And that's something that we have found actually makes these CSR initiatives hinged on sustainability and ESG practices actually sustainable, and allows them to see a co-benefit and be able to actually see what the impact is on the consumer. Right. So we're moving away from something that's just one-off to something that's integrated into business strategy and practices.
Okay. Yeah. And now even for someone who is starting up a company, and even for the startups. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure over the years there has been a whole increase in startup companies. They're probably wondering, they've been in, let's say, 2 years in the market right now. They really want to get into the whole initiative of CSR. But then how do they really do this? Should the company, for example, I'm starting my own Nyaringita & Co. company. Do I start up? Do I conduct the whole CSR just before I launch my company? Do I do it? How long should I take before I actually do this CSR?
I mean, ideally, if you want it to be sustainable, it needs to be embedded in how you're actually running your business.
So you should have already started the business.
When you're setting up the business, look at what are the most let's talk about environmentally friendly ways to do it. I'll give an example. There's a talk I went for with actually local fashion designers, startups, who are trying to figure out how do we become more sustainable. Looking back at what it is that we did back in the day when it came to our fabrics, our fibers, and how do we work with that there's some people who actually process fibers, I think made out of pineapple, to make clothing, and how do we have that as part of our system to sell clothes and to manufacture locally made clothes, as an example. There are also organizations that work with weavers, when it comes to weaving fashion items in local communities, and have that as part of their practice. That's how they actually create their products, and that's embedded in their business. And they're not a corporate entity. They're not your big guys, but that's how they're doing it. So they've embedded it in the way they work.
And I love the fact that you mentioned that, because I was really heading there, because I'd wonder if I was not to start the whole Nyerinkit & Co. I'd imagine, well, it's a small startup, and nobody really even knows it. So do I even have to go big on the CSR? Because normally we know most companies that would do CSR out here are big established companies, but you're really mentioning startups that are really trying to do it. Mama Mboga is out there and she's wondering, am I also part of this conversation?
I mean, it also, you look at it at different ways. I think the conversation around being environmentally friendly. A lot of people talk about sustainable packaging, sustainable ways in which we're doing things. But if you look at culturally, maybe in more rural areas, those practices are probably still there. So for us, it may be a way of life, the way in which we're growing our vegetables, the way in which we are harvesting from farm to her shop. That also may be a sustainable practice. She's already embedded just by way of our culture. So there's some things that we're already doing that are innately responsible. One of the things that we find, not just with the Mama Mboga, but also with big organizations, they may be doing stuff, but they're actually not talking about it. They're not communicating about it. In fact, we had a meeting with some big corporates, and they're like, hey, we're actually doing a lot. We're doing a lot, and if we actually shouted about it, people would really feel what it is that we're doing and see the impact we're having. But sometimes what happens with CSR is that you redirect your resources to the core business. So if it's going to be shouting about what it is that you're doing internally, you may say, let's talk about our products, let's talk about our brand, communicate about that, and CSR practices don't get as much focus. So for the Mama Mboga, what I'm saying is that she's probably already being sustainable in the way in which she's operating a business. What it is that we're not shouting about that and showing what it is that we're already doing as Kenyans.
And you definitely keep on mentioning the whole environmental factors. And it's actually a very interesting conversation. We've been having it even during the whole Africa Climate Summit, and even actually COP28 is coming in Dubai. Right now, companies will definitely be looking, how can we streamline even our whole our imagery to also fit in that. But then, and most companies are really facing pressure to reduce their environmental footprint. But then some of these companies are actually emitting a lot of fossil fuels and all this. How does such a company maneuver and balance? On one hand, reduce the environmental footprint, but then on the other hand, actually ensure that, we maintain a whole CSR on this.
I mean, I guess with some organizations, some industries, you're definitely going to be contributing to CO2 emissions. I think we've had I'll give an example. I think the Coca-Cola, for example, they tried as much as possible to see how they can reduce, not reduce, but make sure that plastic that is manufactured by them can be recycled. So I think a couple of years ago, we've seen that Sprite move from being a green bottle to a clear bottle, which makes it easier to recycle. So of course, their packaging is mainly in plastic, but they've made a few tweaks that they can to make it a bit more recyclable. Then there's also the aspect, I think, of MTN. They've used some solar products to power some of their stations, their masts. But then there are also organizations who buy carbon credits. So I think in terms of those larger industries that cannot fully negate the emissions that they have, there are organizations who can sell carbon credits because they're a bit more sustainable. And there's some way we can almost equalize it. I'm not saying that it would be perfect, but I know there are some organizations, and even locally, who operate like that.
And so who's the biggest player when it comes to the whole CSR initiative, everything? So everything was discussed in the whole boardroom. Now they want to implement it there. But so who is the biggest player here? Is it the community that is going to be benefiting from this, or the whole company itself?
So there are two ways to look at it. because for the larger corporates, ESG is becoming quite important for board members and practices, even us as Ipsos. We're asked, what is it that you're doing to be a bit more sustainable as a business? What we found is that sometimes we look a bit too internally as organizations. We say, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to work. But at the end of the day, we are a business. And for consumers, they may be like, okay, that's nice, but how does that actually help me? So one of the things that we've been able to find out as Ipsos is really looking at what is a co-benefit to the consumer by using your product. Because consumers generally, as citizens, they want to be able to, we want to save the planet, we want to do well. But now when it comes to shopping, you're like, hey, am I going to buy this eco-friendly product? Or am I going to buy something that fits my pocket and fits my needs? Yeah. You act as a consumer, you look at what actually fits your pocket and what fits your needs. So for a corporate, it's now looking at understanding that, what is driving a consumer, so they can embed their operations, their practices, in line with consumer behavior. Mm-hmm. And we see this already when corporates want to introduce new products, product innovation to get new, to just generate more revenue. I was reading something about skimpflation in the paper, how they're reducing the size of products, and you're probably paying the same amount as you did before because of the cost of raw materials. They're already doing that. They're trying to innovate in a way to maintain profits. If you can do that and find a sustainable way to still address the consumer's needs, then it's a win-win for both sides. But there's also the other end. Some consumers really have passion and like, yes, we're happy, whatever we're buying is saving the environment. Others, it doesn't really, they're not really interested in it. It's not really a big deal for them.
And this really goes to show that even for consumers, for the corporates, when they're looking at the consumer, consumers come in from different backgrounds.
Exactly.
And even the community. For example, this corporate wanted to maybe build schools in a different community. They come from different backgrounds. And this can really be a challenge, right? When even for the corporate. So how should they maneuver this? Should they now take time to understand the community? Should there be a community representative in the boardroom talks when they're really setting up some of these CSR initiatives?
I mean, that's what we do as Ipsos.
Okay.
we help clients, we help organizations really understand their target consumer or target audience. I know within one of our divisions, we do, you might introduce a new product or now a school setup. And you must talk to all the stakeholders at the ground level. It could be your students, your teachers, community representative, key influencers. You must understand what is important to them before you embark on building the school, or where is it going to be? What is important for them? How many children are there? What age groups? Where is the gap? So at least you can see how do we best fit this into their lifestyle and into their needs. Once you introduce it, it won't be perfect. So usually what we normally do is a baseline study, look at what the situation is, introduce the school in this case, build it up, and then get a midline study, see what is working, what's not working, advise on what tweaks we made, and then maybe an endline study. And then leave it at that, or maybe track a year later, or something like that. Yeah, so you must engage your people. You can't just throw it there.
And the fact that you mentioned a year later, now in this particular talks, do you have it, we are doing this as a short term, and by the short term, we'll be done with it. And then probably again talk, we can try maybe doing it as a long term. Because for example, as we were mentioning, the whole schools, I'd assume it's a whole long term.
Yeah.
Because generations will go through this particular school. But then a whole other bit, maybe even for example, the whole environmental bit, maybe 10 years from now, the whole environment might be in a whole different kind of setup. So how important really is it factoring we're going to be doing this as a short term and then as a long term?
I mean, if it's a school, it has to be long term.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to be a responsible organization, then you need to make sure that you have a plan, a vision for the school, what outcomes you want there to be, and put resources into it, be it financial, be it human resources, to make sure that it's sustainable and still has impact on the community. As I said, we're trying to move away from CSR, which is, hey, look, we've done something, bit of PR and disappear, because that doesn't actually have any impact. And if the public or if consumers now see you behaving in a way that goes against their values, or they feel you've left them stranded, as an organization, you get some negative PR or sentiment from the community.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important that we look at whatever we put into place, if it's giving back to the community in the form of a school, for example, there is an actual plan behind it. Now, there's also the challenge for the corporates to be like, okay, what impact is this having to me and my business? You may have your shareholders who are like, okay, we're spending X amount here, but what is the return on investment?
Mm-hmm. So it's a whole delicate balance.
It's a delicate balance, but you must know what it is that you're measuring and be able, that's why I was saying you have those studies, know what it is that you need to tweak to make sure there's an ROI for all the stakeholders.
Right.
Yeah.
And well, still even in the whole school actually, and these are cases that we've had even on the whole news. You probably find that in a particular county, for example, there was a looting that happened. Maybe this particular corporate partnered with the county government and even some county leaders to actually set up this particular school and even some community-based organizations. But at the end of the day, there's a whole egg on the face for this corporate because there's a whole bad reputation. Maybe this corporate was not involved in one way or another in maybe defrauding the community some X amount of money to build the school.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, well, the whole, let's say, Nyaringita core is still mentioned in this, defrauding some particular community. So how does Nyaringita core, for example, maneuver out of this?
So, Nyaringita core, your organization.
that name is hard.
The organization.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that everything will be perfect. With any organization, there's bad PR, there's good PR. But one thing that we found is that if the organization generally has some goodwill with the community or with the consumers, with the society, whatever it is, then yes, they'll not be happy about the fact that they're associated with the local government and then there was corruption at the end of the day. But if they believe in the ethos of that company, they'll be more forgiving. So there's something that we do internally when you look at affinity for a brand desire. That is you, at least as an organization, doing well, being able to connect with the consumer or the people, being able to give them a product that they actually like and they enjoy it.
Yeah.
So yes, they're like, hey, Kwani, what happened here? We're not used to seeing you in this light.
Yeah.
So if you're able to build that affinity with your consumers, at least they'll be more forgiving. If, on the other hand, you've not engaged your consumers, maybe they don't see you as desirable, maybe they just see you as a brand that's there, you may get more negative, less forgiving feedback from the people. Then again, obviously, you have to get your PR team to step in just to help you maneuver. That's why PR is there. But making sure that at least you connect with your consumer and your audience, you can get a bit of forgiveness on that aspect.
So basically, with time, the community might try and say, well, we forgive Nyaringita.
Yes.
We'll try. So what does the whole PR team come to do after all this incident?
Ooh, I'm not a PR expert.
in your expertise, in your relationship with companies, what should they be doing, the kind of communication, even with the community around that? Because at the end of the day, they really want to maintain their image and being responsible around this particular place.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, they need to make sure that they speak and they share their point of view, but they have to be cognizant of the stakeholders who are involved. So that could be a very sensitive issue, but at least showing empathy. We understand that we were associated with this. This was a part that we had to play, and this is what we're committed to. Maybe something along those lines. Right. I said I'm not a PR expert, but if you look at some of the PR, sensitive PR stories that have happened maybe around the past 10, 15 years, if you're able to demonstrate empathy for the consumer or the society, that can help you get a bit of forgiveness. But making sure that you're not quiet and letting it happen, especially if it's affecting the people you're supposed to better the lives of, you better make sure you're responsible and taking a stand.
Right.
For what it is that you were intending to do and what you did not do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's focus on where you're really an expert in matters research.
Okay.
For, I believe is it about 12 plus years experience in all this?
Yeah. It's
yes.
been a long time.
You've definitely had the whole global trends. And actually now, I'm now even curious in Kenya, the kind of trends that we've had when it comes to social responsibility for different kind of corporates. What does your research actually show?
So the research that we do is mainly to look at a global level, sentiment.
Okay.
We're looking at what consumers across the world feel about certain issues. So there is one that we look at in terms of the environment, to what extent they feel that we're headed for disaster, or is it a concern for them?
Yeah.
Now, as I said, as consumers, we act with our most immediate need. So when you look at the issues of environment vis-a-vis issues of inflation, cost of living, people are more concerned about inflation, cost of living, us globally and even locally as well. When it comes to environment, it's not that much of a concern because they got bigger fish to fry. But that said, if we look at that metric of environment, globally we're seeing that concern is growing year on year. Within Kenya, we're seeing typically from the socioeconomic classes, middle class, upper class, they tend to be a bit more concerned about the environment than the lower middle class and the lower class, who have more pressing issues. But if you look at the pressing issues, maybe it's looking at, I don't know, just a good plumbing system, having access to water, having access to good sewage systems, whatever it is. If you don't have that, then obviously there's going to be pollution. So if you think of the fact that if people are in poverty and don't have access to water and don't have these systems in place, that is what they need. But at the end of the day, if you sort that out, you're sorting some environmental issues. So the way in which we look at environment has been very much hinged on the West, on what we think of being environmentally friendly. But as I said, there's some things that we think about as being important to our livelihoods that if solved could help solve the environment, or maybe there's some practices we're already doing that are sustainable. Yeah, so within Kenya, that's what we're looking at. We look at it from a consumer's perspective. Now, that's something we do as Ipsos. As Ipsos has said, we're also a custom research organization. So we do have clients who come and ask very specific questions to help them move the needle if they want to change something. So if they want to introduce more sustainable packaging, for example, they'll come to us and say, okay, we want to move from X to Y. How do we go about that? And the difference is, how do we go about that in different markets? For each market is different across the continent.
Yeah.
Now, some markets may be like, oh yeah, we really want to recycle. Cool, we'll go about it that way. Some other markets may say, if you can give us some money, if we do this, give us a gift, a reward, then we'll go about it.
And now for let's say corporate that was based in top of my mind, I'd say Belgium, for example.
Okay.
They're quite big in Belgium, and they have a way how they do things.
Yeah.
But they really want to set up a branch in Kenya. That will probably be their headquarters in Africa.
Okay.
They definitely have to also do the whole corporate social responsibility so that the whole Belgium company can be known, be sustainable even in Africa, basically. In your research and in your experience, would you say local companies would tend to be more sustainable in that rather than international companies where they're probably coming in, it's a new land for them, it's a whole foreign for them, rather than Nyaringita & Co. I've been in Kenya for the longest. I know what the consumer wants. I know to speak their language, rather than a new, quote unquote, an alien coming in, and they're really trying to figure out. So how do we do this?
Yeah, I mean, if you're coming into a new market, you have to understand how it works. So, I mean, it depends on a local company versus an international company. International company definitely has to understand the landscape. And I said that's where we would come in to help them understand the local landscape. They may have, if it's a global company setting up, they may have the muscle in terms of financial and human resources. So they may decide to partner up with a local company who knows more about how these things work, and then get them to push the initiative. It's quite interesting, though. There's another story that I heard, and it's just highlighting the importance of understanding the local market. I think it was a microfinance institution, and they were looking at understanding how do we help or give back to society in Kenya. And the way in which they profiled the people in need in Kenya, maybe we're farmers, we've got cattle, we've got livestock. In their market, if you have cattle and livestock, you're very rich. So they're like, how's this person someone we should give back to? So it's very important for you to understand the local nuances through partnership, but also through research, so you're not making mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we actually, before we get now to the whole solutions, even when you're talking about the whole financial muscle they come with, you'd find most international corporates, even based in Kenya, they'd really be out there. They definitely have a lot of eyeballs. You'd see, corporate X from this particular international, maybe from the Europe, they were sponsoring this particular maybe event. They probably built a number of schools out here. The whole, even for the local, would you really advise that they compete with such kind of eyeballs?
I mean, if you talk about sustainability, it's about competition, really. You're trying to do good for the world.
So there's no completely, the word competition does not exist in CSR?
Well, I mean, the main objective is to better the world and society. If you're talking maybe about sales and market share, then maybe there'll be competition on that side. What I think is important is, bigger corporates would have more muscle, I said, more financial muscle to shout about what it is that they're doing. But there are also ways you can do that as a smaller organization, using your local influencers, that is on the ground, in communities, on social media, whatever it is that's more cost effective in terms of making noise about what you do. It could also just be about being consistent in your messaging. And that's something that I said, we don't want to be one-off and then leaving it out. So anyone who maybe buys your product, maybe there's a message there, or there's something in the packaging that reminds people what it is that you're doing, as a way to keep that conversation going and keep it embedded in the heads of the consumers. So there's financial muscle, but you can also be tactical about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Before I get more of the solutions, I know you're touching on the whole solutions. There's someone asks here, 22047, how do you deal with the negative community?
Oh, I don't know what a negative community is.
Okay, I think she should have probably explained more. But then, in reality, you'd find a corporate might trying to embed themselves in a community, trying to be responsible. But then, the kind of feedback that they get, it's not that quite positive. They definitely get negative feedback. Maybe this particular community is enclosed and probably it's cold. They don't really want to work with the corporate. How does now the corporate handle this?
As I said, before you go and introduce a product, understand, even it's a CSR initiative, understand the consumer. So that's a mistake. I think we've seen it here on a corporate perspective. Companies who are coming in and said, we have done this in another African country, so it should work here, and it doesn't work here. It's different. So with any introduction of any new initiative or product to a consumer, you must do your research. You must do your due diligence and figure out, does what I have actually match what they need? If whatever you have, you can see there's a benefit to it, what are the barriers to it, how do you overcome it? So again, you have to work with understanding them first. I think what we don't like is having stuff pushed on us by foreign organizations, because we're not a dumping ground. You must engage us.
And even as I get your last ones, what kind of solutions is Ipsos really offering to clients?
I mean, for ESG, we help clients across the board, depending on whether you're starting out. So we have an orientation stage where you want to look at what is ESG, what are the key issues that are emerging, maybe in my industry, maybe it's something that's important for us to comply by, what is our business doing, and what can we actually take up. Then you can also test it. As I said, you must test what it is you're going to do just to see, is it going to work, is it not going to work? And then talk about it, as I mentioned. Make sure that people see what it is that you're doing. speak to the local communities. This is what's happening. This is the impact that's happening. And also talk to your internal stakeholders, because there's also an ROI they're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, with this money we're putting into. These are the metrics we have. This is the baseline score. This is the end-line score. This is how it's impacting our brand, for example,
Right.
or impacting sentiment about the corporate. And then also evaluate. So we can look at things when it comes to evaluation, you know, looking at whatever it is that we're doing, whether in terms of operationally, you know, embedding the ESG practices operationally, or through our communication. We can see, is that actually having an impact on the brand, and to what extent is it having an impact? What is the impact of our sustainable practices vis-a-vis all the other market dynamics? Like I said, price, availability, what's the competition doing, and all the other things that a consumer has to consider. Where does sustainability fit in, and for whom is it important?
Right.
So again, evaluating that to help you track. And then we have a behavior change model just to let you know if people are likely to change or not change based on what you want to introduce.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Koi Kariuki, Senior Research Manager at Ipsos Kenya. Thank you for your wise words. Definitely learned. Now, when I actually start my own Nyaringita, it was a fake, but then now when I actually started,
Now you're ready.
I believe I'm ready. And I believe you're also ready, maybe your startup, or maybe you've actually been in this particular industry for quite a long time. Just taking a look at the whole CSR into matters sustainable initiatives. This particular conversation definitely has to wrap it up. We're taking a short break, but then now imagine taking a whole walk for kilometers.